The Mafia boss thought his enemies were gone. Until the black waitress warned, "They found you." Dante Romano, a man known for his ruthless control over New York's criminal empire, sat in a dimly lit corner of his favorite restaurant. It was a rare night for the Mafia boss, a moment of peace amidst the constant chaos of his life. He had just finished dealing with a dangerous rival, and for once, he thought his enemies were gone, at least for now. The silver cutlery clinked softly as he pushed his plate aside, sipping the dark red wine in his glass. The weight of power rested comfortably on his shoulders, as if the entire city bent to his will. He had built an empire from the ground up, and nothing, not even the deepest treachery, could shake him. But tonight, something felt different. A small ripple of unease stirred in the back of his mind. His eyes wandered over the room, taking in the luxurious ambience, the crystal chandeliers, the polished marble floors, the quiet murmur of his guests. Everything seemed perfect, but that's when he noticed her. A waitress, moving quickly between the tables, her eyes scanning the room with a practiced wariness. Dante had seen many faces in his life, but hers caught his attention in a way he couldn't quite explain. She wasn't particularly striking, but there was something about her, a quiet intensity, a sharpness in her gaze that didn't belong in the world of service. As she walked past him, their eyes met for just a split second, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a twinge of discomfort. But it wasn't until much later that evening, when the restaurant was at its busiest, that the true cause of his unease would reveal itself. Emma-chan, the black waitress, was nearing the table where Dante sat with his business associates. She had done this routine hundreds of times, balancing drinks and taking orders. But tonight, something felt different. The man who had spent years at the top of the criminal underworld wasn't the only one who sensed something was off. Emma had noticed the sudden surge of tension in the air, the whispers among the staff. She knew something was coming. She could feel it in her bones, a deep intuition honed over years of surviving in the gritty streets of New York. But what really set her on edge was what she saw in Dante Romano's eyes when they briefly met. It wasn't just the cold, calculating gaze of a powerful man. There was something else, fear. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Emma caught it. A single moment, a fleeting expression. Her heart raced. She wasn't supposed to notice these things, not in a world where people like her were meant to be invisible. But she couldn't ignore it. And that's when she knew she had to warn him. She had seen the signs, pieced the details together, and realized that the very enemies Dante thought he had left behind were, in fact, closing in on him. As she walked toward his table, her mind raced with the urgency of her warning. She had no reason to protect him, no reason to stick her neck out for someone so far removed from her world. But she couldn't shake the feeling that if she didn't act, something terrible would happen. She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper, and said the words that would change everything. "Run now." Dante's eyes flicked to hers, his brow furrowing in confusion. For a brief moment, everything seemed to freeze in time. His sharp gaze swept over her face, searching for any sign of deception. But Emma's expression was unwavering, filled with the certainty of someone who had seen far too much to doubt her instincts. The tension in the air was palpable, and in that instant, Dante Romano realized that his enemies were not gone. They had found him, and it was too late to escape. As the words hung in the air, Dante Romano's eyes locked onto the black waitress, Emma-chan. Her face was a mask of determination, her lips tight in an expression that spoke volumes. There was no doubt in his mind. She knew something he didn't. She wasn't just another waitress in a sea of faceless staff. There was something about her, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. But now, her warning echoed in his mind. Run now. His heart skipped a beat. This was not the type of warning he was used to. He had spent years in the underworld, dealing with enemies and threats, but never had he been warned like this, by someone like her. His first instinct was to dismiss it, to chalk it up to some overactive imagination or paranoia. But there was something in her eyes that told him this wasn't just some random advice. This was real. He had been too comfortable, too sure that he had taken care of everything. But now, in this moment, doubt crept in. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping across the polished marble floor, the noise cutting through the tension in the room. His bodyguards, who had been quietly watching from the edges of the room, straightened at once, sensing the change in their boss. Dante's sharp gaze flicked around the restaurant, his mind racing. His enemies, the ones he thought he had eliminated, were not gone. They were closer than ever. He could feel it. He needed to act, and fast. The game had just changed. Luca, Marco, Dante said, his voice low but commanding. Get them. Now. The two men nodded, their hands instinctively going to the guns hidden beneath their suits. Dante's mind was already moving, calculating. Who could have found him? Who was daring enough to come after him? He had destroyed entire organizations, crushed rivals without a second thought. Yet, the feeling of being hunted was something new, something unsettling. As Luca and Marco moved quickly toward the back of the restaurant, Dante turned to Emma, his gaze softer now. Why did you warn me? He asked, his voice quiet but intense. Emma didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her eyes never leaving his. Because I know what it's like to survive, she said simply. I've seen danger before. I can feel it in the air, and right now, it's all around us. Dante nodded slowly, processing her words. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her to speak to him this way, as if they were equals. It wasn't lost on him that Emma was just a waitress in his world, a world where power and money ruled everything. Yet, in this moment, she was the one who had seen the danger before he did. You're smarter than you look, Dante muttered, more to himself than to her. He didn't know what it was, but there was something about her that intrigued him. It was not just her warning, but the way she carried herself, the way she didn't back down. She was not afraid of him. In a world where fear was a currency, that was something rare. He walked towards the back of the restaurant, his bodyguards close behind. But before he reached the door, Emma's voice stopped him. You should trust me, she said, her voice firm. Dante paused, his hand on the door handle. He turned back to face her, his eyes searching hers. And why should I trust you? He asked, his tone skeptical. Emma took a deep breath, and for a moment, it seemed as if she might back down, but then she spoke, her voice steady. Because I can help you, if you let me. Dante stared at her for a long moment, weighing her words. He had no reason to trust this woman, this waitress who had no real place in his world. Yet, something about her felt genuine. Fine, he said at last, his voice hard but with a hint of respect. But don't think for a second I'm doing this for you. I'm doing it for me. Emma nodded. I understand. With that, Dante pushed open the door and walked into the back of the restaurant, his bodyguards following closely behind. Emma stood in the front of the restaurant, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had warned him, and now she had to trust that he would listen. But deep down, she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The game was changing, and she had just become a part of it. The tension in the back of the restaurant was palpable. Dante Romano stood by the kitchen door, his mind racing as his bodyguards, Luca and Marco, prepared for what was coming next. He had underestimated the situation. For years, he had been in control, moving pieces on the chessboard of New York's criminal underworld. But tonight, Emma Chun, the black waitress who had served him 1,000 times without ever drawing his attention, had changed everything. Her words still echoed in his mind. Run now. Dante had always trusted his instincts, but in this moment, he realized that perhaps he had missed something. The enemies he thought were long gone, erased by his power and influence, had resurfaced. And this time, they had found him. Marco stood by the door, his eyes scanning the room. Luca, ever the silent enforcer, was positioned near the back, his hand resting casually on the grip of his weapon. Dante's mind was focused, calculating. He needed to think. The game had shifted, and he couldn't afford to make a mistake. Emma's warning wasn't just a simple caution. She had seen something he hadn't. And now, he had to rely on someone who was supposed to be beneath his notice. I can help you if you let me. Emma's voice played in his head. Dante didn't like it. He didn't like being forced to rely on someone outside his inner circle. But something told him that Emma Chin wasn't just some random waitress. He turned to Luca, his voice cold and commanding. Secure the back exit. Marco, check the front. We can't let anyone slip through. He didn't wait for their responses, already moving toward the kitchen. He had a plan. The time for uncertainty was over. But as he approached the back door, Emma's voice stopped him. You don't have to do this alone, she said, her words calm but firm. Dante turned slowly, his gaze narrowing. The tension in the air thickened. For a moment, it felt like everything had stopped. Emma stood in the doorway of the kitchen, her arms crossed over her chest, unflinching under the weight of his stare. "Why are you still here?" Dante asked, his voice low but edged with something almost like respect. She didn't flinch. "Because I've seen what happens when people don't pay attention," she replied. "I've seen how quickly things can spiral out of control." Dante was silent for a moment, considering her words. She was right. He had underestimated her. And now, as he stood there, facing the possibility of an ambush, he realized that he couldn't afford to take chances. He had built an empire, yes, but empires could crumble in an instant. It was the unexpected threats, the ones that came from the shadows, that destroyed everything. "What do you want from me?" Dante asked, his tone softer now. "I'm not asking for anything," Emma said. "I'm just offering my help." Dante's eyes studied her for a moment, weighing her words. There was something in her expression, something genuine. And for the first time, he found himself considering the possibility that he might need her. He nodded once, sharply. "All right, we'll do it your way." Emma's expression softened just a fraction, but she didn't smile. "Follow my lead, and stay close," she said, turning toward the back door. Dante followed, his instincts now sharpened. As they moved through the narrow hallway behind the kitchen, he could hear the soft murmur of voices from the front of the restaurant. It was quiet now, too quiet. The tension in the air was suffocating. Emma led the way, her movements precise, calm. She knew exactly what she was doing. Dante stayed close behind her, his eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. He could feel the presence of his bodyguards close by, but this time, he wasn't relying on them alone. He was relying on Emma. And in that moment, he realized that, despite the vast differences in their worlds, they were in this together. The front door opened just as Emma reached it. She paused for a brief moment, peeking out into the dimly lit street. It was empty, but that didn't mean it was safe. Dante motioned for his bodyguards to stay back, a signal that he trusted Emma's judgment more than his own instincts right now. She stepped out into the cool night air, her eyes darting back and forth, searching for any sign of movement. Dante followed her, his senses heightened. They were walking into the unknown, but for the first time in a long time, Dante wasn't in control. Emma was. And as the streetlights flickered above them, he couldn't help but wonder how far she was willing to take him, and what kind of danger she might lead him into. Emma led Dante Romano through the narrow alley behind the restaurant, her footsteps echoing softly against the damp pavement. Dante followed closely, his sharp eyes scanning the darkened street. It had been years since he had felt this vulnerable. In the world he had built, control was everything. And right now, control was slipping through his fingers. Emma had warned him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the threat was still looming, closer than he had imagined. They reached a black sedan parked at the end of the alley. The faint glow of the streetlights cast long shadows over the car, making it appear almost ghostly. Emma glanced at him, her face set with determination. "Get in," she said. Dante hesitated for just a moment before nodding and opening the door. As he slid into the back seat, he could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This wasn't just another business deal, another power struggle. This was personal. Emma followed him inside, and the door slammed shut behind her. She immediately turned to the driver, a tall man with a cold expression. "Get us out of here," she ordered. The car started moving, its tires crunching against the gravel. Dante glanced at Emma, his curiosity piqued. "How do you know all this?" he asked, his voice low. Emma turned to him, her gaze steady. "You don't make it through this city without learning a few things," she said quietly. "And I've seen what happens when people like you let their guard down." Dante frowned, his fingers tapping nervously on the seat. "You didn't have to get involved in this," he muttered. "You could have walked away." Emma's eyes flashed with a hint of something he couldn't quite read. "You didn't ask for my help," she said. "But I'm giving it anyway. You don't get to decide that for me." Dante's mind was racing. He hadn't asked for her help. He hadn't even wanted it. But now, as they sped through the empty streets, he realized that he needed it more than he cared to admit. His empire was built on power, intimidation, and fear. But those tools were useless when facing an enemy who knew how to operate in the shadows, someone who could strike without warning. And that's exactly what Emma had seen. He had underestimated the danger he was in. As the car turned onto a quieter street, Dante leaned back in his seat, his thoughts churning. He had been too arrogant, too sure of himself. His enemies weren't just lurking in the background, waiting to strike. They were already here. They had been for a long time, and Emma had been the first to see it. Dante turned to her, his eyes sharp. "So, who are we dealing with?" he asked. "Who's behind this?" Emma was quiet for a moment, as if weighing her words. "There are a lot of people who want to see you fall," she said at last. "But there's one person who's been pulling the strings. Someone who knows you, who's been watching you for a long time." Dante's heart skipped a beat. "Who?" he demanded. Emma met his gaze, her voice steady. "Someone you trusted." Dante's stomach sank. He had trusted so many people in his life, so many faces that had turned out to be enemies in disguise. But there was only one person who could truly get close enough to him. Someone who had the power to destroy everything he had built. The name flashed in his mind like a bolt of lightning. "Giovanni," he whispered. Emma nodded, her expression hardening. "Giovanni Vito. He's the one behind all of this. He's been working in the shadows for years, waiting for the right moment to strike." Dante felt a surge of anger. Giovanni Vito was a former ally, a man he had once considered a friend. But their relationship had soured after a betrayal that Dante had never fully understood. Now, it seemed that Giovanni had been biding his time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to take everything from him. "How do you know all of this?" Dante asked, his voice low and dangerous. Emma's eyes softened for just a moment. "Because I've seen Giovanni work," she said. "I've been watching him for a while now. He's dangerous, and he's not someone you can take lightly." Dante clenched his fists. He had made a mistake by trusting Giovanni, but it was too late to undo that now. The car continued to weave through the streets, the city lights casting an eerie glow on their path. Dante's mind was racing, but one thought stood out above all the rest. Giovanni had to be stopped. And he would stop him, no matter what it took. He turned to Emma, his eyes hard. "I need you to help me take him down," he said. Emma nodded without hesitation. "I will. But it's not going to be easy." Dante smirked. "Nothing ever is." As the car sped down the dark streets, Dante knew one thing for certain. Giovanni Vito had just made the biggest mistake of his life. And Dante Romano wasn't going to let him get away with it. The tension inside the car was suffocating as Dante Romano sat back, his mind racing. Giovanni Vito. The name echoed through his thoughts like a cold, calculated threat. He had trusted Giovanni once, had considered him an ally. But now, it was clear that Giovanni had been playing him from the very beginning. Emma sat across from him, her eyes focused on the road ahead, her silence heavy with meaning. She had given him the information he needed, but the real question remained. What was he going to do with it? The car turned sharply, its tires screeching against the pavement as it sped down a darkened alley. Dante felt the weight of the city pressing down on him. New York, the place he had ruled for years, now felt like a trap, and the walls were closing in. He couldn't afford to hesitate, not anymore. Giovanni was coming for him, and Dante wasn't sure how much longer he could stay one step ahead. The sound of the engine growled, and Dante's thoughts were interrupted by Emma's voice. "We need to act fast. Giovanni's not going to wait." Dante's jaw clenched. He knew she was right. Giovanni wasn't the type to take his time. He was ruthless, calculating, and always 2 steps ahead of everyone else. But this time, it was different. This time, Giovanni had underestimated him. Dante had spent years building his empire, shaping it with his own hands, and he wasn't about to let anyone, especially someone he had once called a friend, tear it all down. "What's the plan?" Dante asked, his voice low and determined. Emma glanced at him briefly before turning her attention back to the road. "We find Giovanni before he finds you," she said simply. "But you're not going in alone." Dante raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You're staying with me?" Emma nodded. "I didn't get involved in this to watch you fail. I'm not going to let Giovanni take you down." Dante looked at her, his expression softening just a fraction. He didn't trust easily, but there was something about Emma that made him believe she would keep her word. She wasn't in this for the money or the power. She was in it because she knew the game, because she understood the stakes. He had underestimated her, but he wasn't making that mistake again. "You're not scared?" Dante asked, his voice a bit softer now. Emma's lips curled into a faint smile. "I've seen enough to know when I should be scared. Right now, I'm focused on making sure Giovanni doesn't get the chance to win." Dante's eyes narrowed, a flicker of admiration crossing his features. "All right then, let's do this." The car sped through the streets, weaving in and out of traffic as the city passed by in a blur. Dante's mind raced with thoughts of Giovanni. How had he Gotten so close? How had he managed to stay under the radar for so long? It didn't matter now. What mattered was finding him and putting an end to this, once and for all. As they approached a nondescript building on the edge of the city, Emma slowed the car, signaling to Dante that they were close. He could feel the tension rising in the pit of his stomach. This was it. The moment of truth. He could no longer hide behind his empire, his wealth, his influence. He was about to face the very man who had betrayed him, the man who had played him like a pawn in his own game. Emma pulled the car into a parking spot and turned to Dante. Stay close. We're not sure who else is here, and we don't have time to play nice. Dante nodded, his hand instinctively going to the gun at his side. He had been in countless situations like this before, but something about this felt different. This time, he wasn't the one in control. He was the one being hunted. They stepped out of the car, the cold night air biting at their skin. The building in front of them was dark, its windows covered with grime. It looked abandoned, but Dante knew better than to trust appearances. Giovanni had a way of operating in the shadows, hiding in plain sight. They moved toward the door, Emma leading the way. Dante's heart pounded in his chest as they approached. He had no idea what was waiting for them inside, but he knew one thing for sure. Giovanni would not go down easily. As Emma reached for the door handle, the sound of footsteps echoed from inside. Dante's muscles tensed, his grip on his gun tightening. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. It smelled of dust and old wood, a stark contrast to the polished elegance of Dante's world. But that was the thing about power. It could be taken, but it was never given back easily. The moment they stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind them. They were no longer in control. They were walking into the lion's den. Emma motioned for Dante to follow her, and they moved silently through the hallway, their footsteps barely making a sound. At the end of the hallway, a single light flickered above a door. This was it. Dante could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His entire life had led to this. Giovanni Vito, the man who had betrayed him, was waiting for him on the other side. And this time, there would be no escape. The hallway was thick with tension, each step Dante took reverberating in the silence that surrounded them. His gun was drawn, his grip firm as he followed Emma through the narrow corridor. They had reached the final stretch, the door ahead barely visible under the flickering light. Dante could feel his heartbeat pounding in his chest, the weight of what was about to happen pressing heavily on him. Behind that door was Giovanni Vito, the man who had once been a close ally, now his most dangerous adversary. He had been betrayed, outsmarted, and now it was time to face the consequences. Emma moved silently ahead, her eyes scanning the area with the precision of someone who had been in the trenches of danger far too many times. Dante could see the calmness in her, the control she exerted even in the face of the unknown. He admired that. He wasn't used to being the one who didn't have all the answers, but tonight was different. Tonight, he needed Emma's steady hand to guide him through the storm. She reached for the door handle, her fingers pausing for a brief second before she pushed it open. The door creaked, a noise that felt like it echoed for miles, but it was the silence that followed that hit Dante the hardest. Inside, the room was dimly lit, shadows dancing across the walls. Giovanni was sitting at a table in the far corner, his back turned, as if he had been waiting for them all along. The moment he sensed their presence, he slowly turned around, a cold smile spreading across his face. Dante. Giovanni's voice was smooth, calm, almost mocking. I was wondering when you'd show up. Dante didn't flinch. You knew I'd come for you, he said, his voice steady but edged with anger. Giovanni chuckled, leaning back in his chair. Of course I knew. You're predictable, Dante. Too predictable. Emma stood at the door, her eyes scanning the room as she remained a silent presence. Dante knew better than to take his eyes off Giovanni for even a second. Giovanni had always been a master of manipulation, a snake in the grass who knew how to twist people to his will. He had done it to Dante once, and now he was doing it again. Dante took a step forward, his hand still tightly gripping the gun, but not aimed just yet. Why? Dante asked, his voice raw with frustration. Why betray me? Giovanni's smile faded just slightly, the mask slipping for a moment to reveal something darker beneath. You were never meant to be the king, Dante, Giovanni said, his voice cold, calculated. I was always the better choice. But you couldn't see that, could you? You thought you could control everything. But you can't. Not anymore. Dante's pulse quickened, his anger rising. You've always been a coward, Giovanni. Hiding in the shadows, pulling strings, but never having the guts to face your enemies. Giovanni's eyes narrowed, a dangerous gleam flashing in them. And you've always been a fool. Your empire is nothing more than a house of cards. You've surrounded yourself with loyal men, but you can't trust them. And that's your weakness. You trusted me. Dante's fists clenched, his mind racing. He had trusted Giovanni. He had let him in, let him become part of his world, and this was the result. Betrayal. You should have stayed in the shadows, Giovanni, Dante said, his voice low and deadly. You're about to find out just how far my reach goes. Without another word, Dante moved. The gun was up in an instant, aimed directly at Giovanni. But before he could pull the trigger, a sharp noise cut through the room, the sound of a gunshot. Emma's head snapped to the side, her instincts kicking in just as the bullet whizzed past her. She dove to the ground, taking cover behind a nearby table. Dante's heart stopped for a beat. He had been too focused on Giovanni. A second gunman. He should have known. Giovanni laughed, the sound echoing in the room. You really thought you could just walk in here and take me down? Giovanni taunted. You're not the predator here, Dante. You're just prey. Dante's blood boiled, but his mind was clear. He dropped to the floor, taking cover beside Emma, and they both moved quickly. He couldn't afford to waste time. Giovanni wasn't going to let him leave alive, not without a fight. Stay low, Emma whispered, her voice urgent. We can't stay here. We need to move. Dante nodded, his gun still in hand as he scanned the room for any sign of the second shooter. He knew Giovanni had planned this carefully, but Dante wasn't about to let him win. With Emma's guidance, they moved in sync, darting from cover to cover. The tension was palpable, each movement a calculated risk. Giovanni had already proven he was willing to do anything to get what he wanted, but Dante wasn't ready to give up his throne. Not yet. Not without a fight. The second shooter fired again, and Dante barely dodged, the bullet grazing his shoulder. Pain shot through his body, but he didn't falter. He was too far into this now to back down. We need to end this, Dante growled, his jaw clenched in determination. Emma glanced at him, her eyes fierce. On three. 1, 2, 3. Together, they stood up and moved toward Giovanni, guns raised, ready to put an end to the game that had started so long ago. The final showdown had begun. The room was heavy with silence after the shots fired. Dante and Emma had barely moved when they heard the second gunman's footsteps, his presence lingering like a shadow that refused to go away. Dante's heart was pounding in his chest, the adrenaline coursing through him like wildfire. He could feel the sting in his shoulder, the warm trickle of blood seeping into his shirt, but it didn't matter. Not now. They had to end this. His eyes never left Giovanni, who sat behind the desk, smirking like he had already won. But Dante wasn't finished yet. The gunfire had stopped for a moment, and he could hear the faint rustling of movement. He and Emma had managed to duck for cover, but the next step would have to be decisive. Giovanni's voice sliced through the tension. You think you can stop me, Dante? You think you can take me down after all this time? Dante didn't respond right away. He could feel the weight of the gun in his hand, the cold metal a reminder of the power he wielded. But the real power was in how he used it, how he controlled the situation. And right now, the balance of control was shifting. Emma's voice cut through the stillness. Dante, we can't stay here. He's already planned this. The whole place is rigged. Dante's eyes snapped to her. Emma had been right about Giovanni, right about everything. He hadn't taken her seriously enough, but now he saw the sharpness in her every move, the experience she had in navigating the dangerous world he had spent his life in. Emma was his ally in this fight. He owed her his trust. Dante nodded, acknowledging her words. Then let's end it. Once and for all. He gripped his gun tightly, preparing to make his move. He wasn't just going to sit back and let Giovanni have the final word. Not this time. On 3, Emma said. We rush him. We have one shot at this. Dante steadied himself, his eyes narrowing on Giovanni, who was still seated, seemingly unfazed by the chaos. It was arrogance, the kind that made him dangerous. But Dante knew how to break through that. 1. Emma counted, her voice calm, controlled. 2, she said. Time seemed to slow down as Dante prepared for the final push. 3, she said, and they both moved at once. Dante pushed off the wall, sprinting toward Giovanni's position. He was fast, focused, and the pain in his shoulder only fueled his determination. Emma was right behind him, moving with a grace that betrayed her calm exterior. The gunfire started again, but it wasn't coming from Giovanni. The second gunman had positioned himself, and the moment they moved, he opened fire. Dante ducked, the bullet grazing past his arm, but he didn't slow down. His only focus was Giovanni, who was now standing, his hands raised, as if he didn't believe they had the courage to fight back. Dante's vision blurred with anger as he reached the desk, shoving it aside with one powerful move. Giovanni stumbled back, a look of shock on his face as he saw the fury in Dante's eyes. "You should have stayed hidden, Giovanni," Dante growled, stepping closer. Giovanni's smile faltered. "You think you can kill me, Dante," he sneered. "You're not the man you used to be." Dante narrowed his eyes. "I'm the man who's going to make sure you never hurt anyone again." Without another word, Dante raised his gun, the barrel pointed straight at Giovanni's chest. But before he could pull the trigger, a voice broke through the tension. "Don't do it," Emma said from behind him. Dante's finger hesitated on the trigger, and he turned to look at her, confused. "What are you talking about?" he asked. Emma stepped forward, her eyes intense. "If you kill him, you're no better than he is," she said, her voice steady. Dante looked at her for a long moment. Her words struck him harder than anything Giovanni had said. He had been ready to pull the trigger, to take control of the situation in the only way he knew how. But Emma was right. Killing Giovanni wouldn't bring him peace. It would only make him a part of the very darkness he had spent years trying to escape. Dante lowered his gun, his hands shaking slightly. "Get up," he said to Giovanni, his voice cold. Giovanni hesitated for a moment, but then slowly stood, his hands raised in surrender. "You're making a mistake," Giovanni spat. "You're not in control anymore. You never were." Dante stepped closer, his eyes cold and hard. "I'm in control now, Giovanni. And this ends tonight." He motioned for Emma to move. She nodded and stepped aside, giving Dante space. He wasn't going to kill Giovanni, but he was going to make sure Giovanni understood just how much he had lost. He wasn't the king anymore. Dante had taken back control, and Giovanni would never threaten him again. As they walked out of the room, Dante felt a weight lifting off his shoulders. He had made the right decision. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The game had changed, and Dante was ready to play by his own rules. Dante stood in the dimly lit hallway, the weight of what had just happened settling heavily in his chest. Giovanni was still alive, but Dante had managed to strip him of his power, his pride, and his grip on the city. He had done it without pulling the trigger, a choice that felt strangely liberating. The sound of Emma's footsteps echoed in the quiet space, drawing Dante out of his thoughts. She had stayed by his side throughout it all, never wavering, and now, as they walked away from the confrontation, Dante couldn't help but wonder if they had reached the point of no return. They were no longer just two people caught up in a violent world. Something had shifted. "Are you all right?" Emma's voice broke through his reverie. Dante glanced at her, the familiar fire in her. "I'm still there, though now, there was something else. Concern, maybe. Or understanding." "I will be," Dante replied, his voice low. "This isn't over. Giovanni is still a threat, and I've made too many enemies." Emma nodded, her gaze steady. "But you're in control now. You've made sure Giovanni knows that." Dante exhaled sharply. It was true. He had taken back control, but that didn't change the fact that his empire was still under siege. Giovanni might have been weakened, but there were others lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "This is just the beginning," Dante muttered, his voice filled with determination. "Giovanni's downfall won't be enough. There's a storm coming, and I need to be ready." Emma slowed her pace, giving Dante a moment to process his thoughts. "What's your plan?" she asked. Dante turned to face her, his eyes hard. "I'm going to take back everything Giovanni tried to steal from me. He thought he could destroy me, but he underestimated what I'm capable of." Emma looked at him with an understanding that seemed to go deeper than mere words. "And I'll be here to help you. You're not alone in this." Dante felt a twinge of something in his chest, a flicker of gratitude mixed with a touch of disbelief. He had never allowed anyone this close, never trusted anyone as he did her. She was the key to making it all work. "I don't deserve your loyalty," Dante said quietly, his voice rough. "You don't need to," Emma replied, her tone unwavering. I made my choice. Dante swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. She wasn't just some random ally. She was someone who had chosen to stand beside him, and that made all the difference. They reached the car, the cold air hitting them as the door slammed shut behind them. Dante sank into the seat, his mind already spinning with the next move. He needed information, more than what he had now. Giovanni's fall had only left a power vacuum, and in this world, a power vacuum never lasted long. We need to make sure no one fills Giovanni's seat, Dante said as the car pulled away, the city lights casting fleeting shadows on the road. The right move now is to show the city that I'm still in charge. Emma sat back in her seat, her gaze thoughtful. And what about Giovanni? What's the next move with him? Dante clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. Giovanni will answer for what he's done. He won't get off easy. Emma glanced at him, a flicker of concern in her eyes. Are you planning to kill him? She asked quietly. Dante paused for a moment, weighing the question. No, he said finally. I'm not going to make that mistake. But I'll make sure he never has the chance to hurt anyone again. He'll be a prisoner of his own lies, his own guilt. Emma nodded, as if accepting that answer. She wasn't naive. She knew that in Dante's world, there was always a cost to getting what you wanted. You're right, she said after a beat. He'll suffer more in silence than he ever would in death. Dante's eyes hardened as they drove through the streets, the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him. The city was vast, its streets filled with people and power plays. But Dante knew it was time to make his move, to seize the control that had always been rightfully his. He had to show the world that the king was still standing. We'll start by sending a message, Dante said, his voice filled with purpose. Giovanni's fall was just the first domino. Now, it's time to take down the rest of them. Emma turned her head toward him, her eyes sharp. Who's next? Dante's lips curled into a grim smile. Everyone who thought they could take me down. He wasn't going to let this war be fought in the shadows anymore. It was time for everyone to know who was truly in charge. The car sped down the street, the sound of the tires on the asphalt a rhythmic reminder of what was coming. There was no turning back now. The pieces were in motion, and Dante wasn't going to stop until he had reclaimed everything that was his. Emma sat beside him, silent but resolute. Together, they were unstoppable. The battle for control had just begun. The cold night air whipped through the streets as Dante's car glided through the city. The hum of the engine was the only sound that filled the silence between him and Emma. She sat next to him, her eyes focused on the road ahead, but Dante could tell she was processing everything. The plan was set in motion. Giovanni was defeated, but the power vacuum left behind had yet to be filled. Dante knew better than to think the threat was gone. There were always more enemies lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. We need to hit fast, Dante said, breaking the silence. His voice was filled with authority, a man who had been through enough to know that hesitation meant death. Giovanni's allies will be scrambling, looking for ways to fill his seat. We have to show them we won't back down. Emma nodded, her grip on the seat tightening. And how do you plan on doing that? She asked, her tone sharp. Dante glanced at her, admiring her focus. She wasn't just a bystander in this world anymore. She was part of the plan, and whether he liked it or not, he needed her. We go after the ones who think they can play this game like we're not here, he said, his jaw tightening. It's time to remind them who's in charge. As the car turned a corner, a familiar building came into view. It was one of Dante's businesses, a front for money laundering and other, less legal operations. He had built this empire with his own hands, and he wasn't about to let it crumble. Pull up to the back, Dante instructed. Emma followed his order without a word, the car slowing as they approached a nondescript alley behind the building. Dante's mind was already moving to the next phase of the plan. This place is a hub, he continued, his voice low. Anyone who wants to make a move on my territory will have to go through here. Emma parked the car, her gaze never leaving the street. Dante opened the door, his hand brushing against the cool metal of the car as he stepped out. The night was quiet, but he knew better than to think it was safe. He motioned for Emma to follow as they made their way toward the entrance. Inside, the building was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of smoke and old wood. Dante walked with purpose, his every step calculated. He had been in this place 1,000 times before, but tonight was different. Tonight, it wasn't just about control. It was about sending a message. As they walked down the narrow hallway, Dante could hear the low murmur of voices ahead. He motioned for Emma to stay behind as he approached the door to the main office. The room was quiet, and through the crack in the door, he could see a few of Giovanni's old associates. They were seated around a table, talking in hushed tones, clearly trying to figure out their next move. Dante's lips curled into a smile as he pushed the door open, his presence immediately silencing the room. The men looked up, their faces a mix of surprise and wariness. "Gentlemen," Dante's voice cut through the silence. "I see you've been busy." One of the men stood, a nervous smile on his face. "Dante, we didn't expect," he started, but Dante held up a hand, silencing him. "Save it," Dante interrupted. "I'm not here to listen to your excuses. Giovanni's gone, and now you have a choice." The men exchanged uneasy glances, but Dante didn't wait for them to speak. "You can either fall in line, or you can get out of my way," he continued, his voice cold and commanding. "This city is mine. Anyone who thinks otherwise will regret it." There was a long pause, the tension thick in the air. The men at the table didn't move, but Dante could see the fear in their eyes. They knew who he was, and they knew what he was capable of. Emma stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the men at the table. Dante didn't look at her. He was too focused on the group in front of him. "You all know how this works," he said, his voice growing colder. "Giovanni thought he could take me down, but all he did was make me stronger. Don't make the same mistake." There was no more hesitation. One of the men nodded, his face tense. "We're with you," he said, his voice resigned. "We want to be on your side, Dante. We're done with Giovanni." Dante nodded, a small, grim smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Smart choice." He turned to leave the room, Emma following close behind. As they walked out, Dante's mind was already racing with plans for the future. Giovanni was gone, but the real work had just begun. He had to solidify his position, remind everyone who controlled this city. But it wasn't just about power anymore. It was about respect. It was about showing everyone that Dante Romano would never be defeated. Emma glanced at him as they stepped into the hallway, her eyes sharp. "You know they'll come for you," she said quietly. "They'll want to test you." Dante's eyes met hers, and for the first time, he allowed himself a brief moment of vulnerability. "Let them come," he said, his voice unwavering. "I'm ready." The door slammed shut behind them as they exited the building, the weight of the city pressing down on them both. The battle for control had only just begun. The city was never truly quiet, but tonight, it felt unnervingly still. Dante leaned back in the seat of the car, staring out at the skyline. The lights blinked in the distance, a constant reminder of the empire he had built and the one he was still fighting to protect. Giovanni's death had been a significant blow to his enemies, but the real battle was only just beginning. They would not rest until they saw him fall, and Dante knew that. "So what's the next move?" Emma's voice broke the silence, bringing him back to the present. He turned to look at her. She sat across from him, calm but focused, as always. She had been with him since the beginning of this mess, and now, it felt like she was the only person he could truly rely on. "The next move?" Dante repeated, his voice hard. "The next move is to make sure no one forgets who's in charge." Emma nodded, her eyes meeting his. "And how do you plan on doing that?" Dante's lips curled into a small smile, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "We start by hitting the ones who think they can still play the game," he said. "We remind them who's running this city." Emma didn't speak for a moment, her gaze drifting to the window as the car sped through the city. She knew the danger of what Dante was proposing. It was a risk, but in this world, risks were part of the game. "You're playing with fire," she said quietly. "You know that, right?" Dante chuckled darkly, the sound echoing in the silence of the car. "I've been playing with fire my entire life," he said, "and I've always come out on top." The car turned a corner, slowing as they approached another one of Dante's properties. This one wasn't just a front. It was a headquarters, a place where decisions were made, where alliances were formed, and where power was brokered. Dante's hands tightened on the seat as the car came to a stop. "This is it," he said, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of anticipation. Emma looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. Dante nodded, his mind already in motion. "Let's finish this." They stepped out of the car, the air cool and crisp as they walked toward the building. The lights of the city flickered in the distance, but here, in this corner of the city, it was quiet. The calm before the storm. Dante led the way, his every step measured, calculated. Emma followed closely behind, her eyes scanning the surroundings. She had learned a long time ago to trust her instincts, and right now, her instincts were telling her that things were about to get much worse before they got better. Inside the building, the atmosphere was tense. The men Dante had left in charge had prepared for this moment, and they were ready. As they made their way through the hallway, Dante could hear the low murmur of voices from the conference room. They were waiting for him. He paused for a moment outside the door, taking a breath, then pushed it open. The room went silent as the door creaked, all eyes on him. "Gentlemen," Dante said, his voice cool and authoritative. "It's time we discuss our next move." The men around the table exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. Dante took a step forward, his eyes scanning the room. He had no patience for hesitation. "Giovanni is gone," he continued. "And we all know what that means. A power vacuum has been created, and it's up to us to fill it. The question is, who is going to step up?" One of the men, a tall figure with a scar running down his face, shifted in his seat. "You've been making a lot of moves lately, Dante," he said, his voice rough. "But you know the rules. You don't take the throne without a fight." Dante's gaze hardened. "I didn't come here for a fight. But if that's what it takes, I'll fight," he said, his voice steady. "I'm not afraid of anyone in this room." There was a long pause before another man spoke up. "We don't trust you, Dante," he said, his voice cold. "Not after everything that's happened. You've made too many enemies, and now they're coming for you." Dante's lips twisted into a smile. "Then they'll find out that I'm not as easy to take down as they think," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The tension in the room was palpable. The men were afraid. Dante could see that. They were afraid of him, and that fear gave him power. "Listen up," Dante said, his tone sharpening. "I'm the one in charge now. If you're smart, you'll follow me. If not, you'll end up like Giovanni. It's your choice." Emma stood at the back of the room, her eyes never leaving the men at the table. Dante's words had hit their mark. They were all too aware of the power he now wielded. Slowly, one by one, the men began to nod, their fear giving way to reluctant respect. The room was still, but Dante could feel the shift. He had won. The city was his again. As they left the conference room, Emma turned to Dante. "You did it," she said, her voice calm. Dante looked at her, his expression hard. "This is just the beginning," he said. "I have a lot of work to do before anyone truly believes I'm back." Emma nodded. "You're not alone in this," she said quietly. Dante turned to look at her, his eyes sharp. "I know." Together, they walked out into the night, the city stretching out before them. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, Dante felt a sense of control return. The storm was coming, but he was ready for it. The night was far from over, and Dante could feel the weight of it pressing on him as he and Emma walked through the streets of the city. It was strange how quiet everything seemed after the chaos of the last few hours. But Dante knew better than to be lulled into a false sense of security. Giovanni may have been taken down, but the real battle was just beginning. He could feel the eyes of his enemies on him, watching, waiting for him to make the wrong move. He wasn't about to give them the satisfaction. "Where do we go from here?" Emma asked, her voice breaking the silence. Dante glanced at her, his gaze hard but thoughtful. He had relied on her more than he cared to admit, and now, her presence at his side seemed more like a necessity than a choice. She had proven herself tonight. "We need to secure our position," he said, his voice low and steady. "Giovanni's death is a message, but we need to show them we're not vulnerable. We need to send a bigger signal." Emma nodded, her eyes never leaving him. "What's the plan?" "We take out the ones who think they can move in on our territory," Dante said, his jaw tightening. "We don't let anyone fill the vacuum Giovanni left behind. It's time to remind everyone who's in control." As they turned another corner, the harsh lights of the city cast long shadows across the street. Dante's thoughts were already running through the next steps. He wasn't going to wait for his enemies to regroup. He'd strike first, make sure they knew that Dante Romano was not to be underestimated. The car pulled up to a discreet building, one that Dante knew well. It was another part of his empire, but tonight, it was more than just a business. It was a message. "This is where we make our stand," Dante said as they both got out of the car. "This place is important. We've got a lot of eyes on us. If we let it slip, we risk everything. Emma followed him, her footsteps almost silent on the pavement. What's the next move? She asked, always focused, always watching. We make sure our allies know where we stand, Dante replied, his voice firm. We reinforce our control, and we remind anyone who wants to challenge us that there are consequences. Inside the building, the atmosphere was tense. Dante could feel it in the air, the anticipation. His men had been waiting for him, ready for his orders. As he walked into the conference room, the room went silent. All eyes were on him. They had followed him before, but now, after Giovanni's fall, they needed reassurance. They needed to know he was still in charge. Dante didn't waste time. He walked to the center of the room, his presence commanding attention. Gentlemen, he said, his voice cold and direct, Giovanni is gone. That's a fact. But I didn't come here to mourn his loss. I came here to make sure no one else thinks they can take what's mine. He paused, letting his words sink in. The men in the room shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. They knew better than to challenge him now. We're not just here to survive, Dante continued. We're here to take back what's ours. We're going to show everyone that this city belongs to us. No one gets to take a piece of this empire without consequences. He could feel the tension building, the weight of his words sinking in. The men in the room exchanged glances, but Dante didn't wait for them to speak. This is how it's going to go, he said, his voice growing even more commanding. We find out who's been talking to Giovanni's people. We make sure they understand that betrayal is never tolerated. And we eliminate anyone who poses a threat to us. No mercy. Emma stepped forward, her eyes scanning the room as she silently took in the men who were present. Dante didn't look at her. He was too focused on the task at hand. And what about the others? One of the men asked, his voice shaky. Dante's gaze shifted toward him, his expression cold. The others, he repeated. You mean the ones who think they can slide into Giovanni's seat and take control? They're already too late. The room was still, the silence heavy with the gravity of Dante's words. The men knew that when Dante spoke, there was no room for doubt. They had seen him tear through enemies before, and they knew that he would stop at nothing to protect his empire. Dante looked around the room, his eyes locking onto each man. This is our city, he said, his voice hardening. And anyone who thinks they can take it from us will regret it. Understood. One by one, the men nodded, their faces a mixture of fear and respect. Dante had already made his mark, and they knew that there was no going back. As he turned to leave the room, Emma fell into step beside him. You did it, she said quietly. Dante nodded, but his mind was still racing. The city was his, but the war wasn't over. This is just the beginning, he said, his voice low. The real test will be holding on to it. The weight of his words hung in the air as they walked through the building. Dante knew that the hardest part was still to come, but for the first time in a long time, he felt the fire of determination burning inside him. The empire was his again, and he wasn't going to let anyone take it from him. Dante stood in the middle of the room, his hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the men around him. The weight of his words still lingered in the air. The room was still, the tension thick with the realization that Giovanni's power was now officially gone, and Dante was once again in control. The men seated at the long conference table were a mix of his old allies and new faces, but one thing was clear, none of them dared to challenge him. He had made it clear that anyone who wanted a piece of the city would have to go through him, and right now, they weren't willing to take that risk. Emma stood at the back of the room, her presence a silent reminder of the price of betrayal. Dante had come to trust her, perhaps more than anyone else. She wasn't just an ally. She had become his equal in this fight for dominance. She had seen the dangers, stood by him, and now, they were going to take what was rightfully theirs. The silence in the room was finally broken by one of the men, a younger associate with a nervous look in his eyes. What's next, Dante? He asked, his voice wavering slightly. Dante's gaze locked onto him, his voice cold but steady. What's next is we make sure this city knows it belongs to me. Giovanni thought he could take it from me, but he underestimated who he was dealing with. Now, we show them that I'm not just some figurehead. This empire is mine to command, and anyone who tries to take it from me will regret it. There was a murmur of agreement around the table, but Dante could sense the unease in the air. They knew he meant business. They had seen what he was capable of, and now, They had to decide whether they would be part of his future or if they would become obstacles. Emma moved to Dante's side, her eyes scanning the room, sharp and calculating. "We're going to need to strike. Fast," she said, her voice low. "The other players are already making their moves. If we wait too long, they'll think we're weak." Dante nodded, his expression hardening. "We won't wait," he said firmly. "We take them down before they even have a chance to move. We don't leave room for anyone to think they can outmaneuver us." The room grew quiet once again, the gravity of his words sinking in. Dante's mind was already working, thinking about the steps ahead, the players who would need to be dealt with, and the alliances that had to be forged. There was no room for hesitation. He had to move quickly, decisively. The silence was broken again, this time by an older man at the table. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "What about Giovanni's people?" he asked. "There are still those loyal to him. We can't afford to ignore them." Dante's gaze hardened. "Giovanni's people," he repeated. "They're either with us now, or they're out. I won't have any loose ends. If they're smart, they'll fall in line. If not, they'll be dealt with. I'm not leaving anyone behind who might come after me later." Emma spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. "You're right. But we need to move quickly. We need to secure the loyalty of those who are on the fence before they make up their minds." Dante's eyes flicked to her, a flicker of something, respect, maybe, crossing his features. "I've got people working on it," he said. "But I need you by my side, Emma. You've been with me through this whole thing. I'm not doing this without you." Emma nodded, her gaze steady. "I'm with you, Dante. You know that." Dante's mind was already shifting to the next phase of his plan. The city wasn't going to give up without a fight, but he wasn't about to let anyone take what was his. Not again. The next few days would be critical. He needed to show his power, solidify his position, and eliminate any threats before they had a chance to rise up. "Tomorrow, we make our move," Dante said, his voice commanding. "We hit their strongest assets. We show them that anyone who stands in our way is going to be crushed. I won't be intimidated. Not by anyone." The men around the table nodded, some more reluctantly than others. But they knew better than to argue. Dante had made it clear. They were either with him or against him. There was no middle ground. As they filed out of the room, Dante turned to Emma, who had remained by his side. "It's all coming together," he said, his voice filled with resolve. "The city is ours, but we need to make sure everyone knows it. Giovanni thought he could take it from me. Now it's time to show him how wrong he was." Emma met his gaze, her expression steady. "You've got this, Dante. No one can take what's yours now." Dante nodded, a small, grim smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. "We're not done yet, but we will be. Soon." As they left the building, the weight of their future hung in the air. The battle for control had only just begun, but Dante knew that this time, he wouldn't back down. The city was his, and no one was going to take it away from him. The air was thick with anticipation as Dante stood at the head of the long table, his men gathered around, each one feeling the weight of the decisions he had made. His empire was back in his hands, but the work was far from over. Giovanni's death had been a message, but messages were easily forgotten. It was time to prove to the city that Dante Romano was not just a survivor, but the king, and no one was going to challenge that claim. "We've made it this far," Dante said, his voice cutting through the silence. "But the real challenge is maintaining control. It's not enough to crush Giovanni. We need to eliminate anyone who thinks they can take advantage of his absence." His words were deliberate, each one calculated to show his men that he wasn't just about power. He was about survival, strategy, and making sure no one ever underestimated him again. Emma, standing beside him, said nothing, but her eyes met his with understanding. They had come this far together, and now the final piece of the puzzle had to fall into place. "The streets know who runs them now," Dante continued, his gaze sweeping over his men, "but they need to feel it. If we want this city to stay ours, we need to take the fight to them. No more hiding in the shadows." There was a murmur of agreement, and Dante saw the respect in their eyes. His reign was no longer a question. It was a fact. Emma stepped forward, her voice calm yet firm. "We need to move quickly," she said, "before anyone gets any ideas." Dante nodded, appreciating her insight. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. He had already spent too many years watching his back. It was time to move forward and make sure everyone knew who was in charge. The plan was set. They would strike at the heart of any faction that dared to challenge Dante's authority. There was no room for hesitation, no time for second-guessing. One by one, Dante's enemies would fall, until the city was truly his. The next few days passed in a blur of action, tension, and rapid decisions. The men Dante had trusted in the past had either pledged their loyalty or been eliminated. The ones who remained were smart enough to stay out of his way. The city was silent, the calm before the final storm. Dante's grip on the city was unchallenged, and he felt the power surge through him once again, like a fire burning away all doubt. But as he sat alone in his office that night, overlooking the city, he knew that the war was never truly over. There would always be someone, somewhere, who wanted what he had. It was a game that never ended. Emma entered the room quietly, her footsteps barely audible on the carpet. She stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. "It's done," she said, her voice low. Dante didn't turn to look at her. He already knew what she meant. The last of his enemies had been taken care of. "Good," he said, his voice tinged with satisfaction, but still hollow. "The city's ours." Emma stepped forward, her gaze softening as she looked at him. "It's yours," she said, her voice almost a whisper. Dante finally turned to face her, his eyes dark with a mix of exhaustion and determination. "It's ours," he corrected her. Emma nodded, but Dante could see the concern in her eyes. "What now?" she asked, her voice full of meaning. Dante stood, walking to the window as he looked out at the sprawling city below. It was his city. Everything he had worked for had led to this moment. But as the city lights flickered below, he couldn't shake the feeling that the quiet wasn't the calm he had hoped for. It was just the quiet before the next storm. "Now," he said, his voice steady, "we make sure no one ever forgets it." Emma walked to his side, her gaze following his. "You've already made them remember," she said quietly. "But we both know this city will never stop testing you." Dante looked at her, a flicker of something close to a smile crossing his lips. "I'll be ready," he said, his voice filled with resolve. The battle for the city had been long, and it had cost him more than he ever thought possible. But now, standing at the peak, Dante realized that the fight was far from over. This was just another chapter in the story of his empire. The power, the risks, the betrayals, they would continue. The city would never stop testing him, but he would never stop fighting back. He would rule this city, no one else. Dante's eyes narrowed as he turned away from the window, the fire inside him burning brighter than ever before. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice low but filled with undeniable authority. "No one takes what's mine, and anyone who tries will regret it." Emma's eyes met his one last time, and for a brief moment, Dante allowed himself to believe that this time, his victory was final. But deep down he knew better. The game was never truly over. The city was his now, but tomorrow would bring new challenges, new enemies, and he would be ready. Always. Dante turned to walk out of the room, Emma by his side, as the weight of his empire settled into place. He had won, but the war for the city would never truly end. It was a battle that would last for as long as he ruled, and Dante Romano would rule forever,